Between 1974 and 1986, California suburbs like these became the primary target for a methodical predator. Residents routinely locked their doors and bolted their windows, only to wake up and find a stranger standing over their beds. The violence followed a distinct pattern of escalation. It began with 120 residential burglaries. It then intensified into a series of sexual assaults, affecting 51 survivors, before finally culminating in 13 murders. Because the perpetrator crossed multiple county lines, local police departments initially investigated the crimes as separate cases. Depending on the city, the suspect was known as the Visalia Ransapper, the East Area Rapist, or the original Night Stalker. Then in 1986, the crimes stopped. The perpetrator disappeared from the police radar, leaving behind a 12-year trail of evidence but no clear identity. Joseph James DeAngelo managed to evade capture for decades because he was a serving police officer. DeAngelo had studied criminal justice at the university level. He understood exactly how investigations functioned, from how evidence was gathered to how police patrols were scheduled, and used that training to remain invisible to his own colleagues while he committed his crimes. By the 1990s, forensic technology advanced enough for investigators to secure a cohesive genetic profile from biological material left at the crime scenes. This DNA proved that all the regional monikers belonged to one man. In this diagram, we see the limitations of the traditional law enforcement database, CODIS. Because DeAngelo was never convicted of a qualifying felony, after DNA swabbing became standard, his profile didn't exist in the system. When investigators ran his code, the search returned a dead end. DeAngelo's insider knowledge of police procedure, combined with the technical constraints of 1990s databases, resulted in a 40-year investigative stalemate. By 2018, years of work into the legal and technical feasibility of using civilian data led to a shift in strategy. Investigators began looking at public platforms where ordinary people voluntarily shared their genetic information. They utilized GD Match, a hobbyist website designed for people interested in tracing their family trees and finding distant ancestors through DNA comparison. By uploading the crime scene DNA to this open-source environment, investigators found what they couldn't find in CODIS: partial matches. These weren't matches to the killer, but to his distant relatives, who had used the site to explore their own history. This pivot changed the investigation. Authorities no longer needed his DNA, they only needed his cousin's. Genetic genealogy works by mapping partial cousin matches backward to identify a common ancestor. The process then reverses, mapping every descendant forward to the present day. Filtering by age, gender, and location reduces a tree of thousands down to one logical suspect. Investigators began surveilling the 72-year-old retired mechanic living in Citrus Heights, waiting for an opportunity to collect a fresh sample of his DNA for verification. When DeAngelo discarded a used tissue in his outdoor trash can, authorities retrieved it. The subsequent lab analysis provided the 100% biological match required for an arrest warrant. The match from that discarded sample provided the definitive identification that traditional, closed-loop police databases had failed to produce for over 4 decades. In April 2018, Joseph James DeAngelo is taken into custody on a quiet suburban street in Sacramento County. While alone in a police interview room after his arrest, DeAngelo admitted to his actions, stating quietly to himself, "I did all those things. I destroyed all those lives." To avoid the death penalty, DeAngelo pleaded guilty in June 2020 to 13 murders. The deal also required him to formally admit to the rapes for which he could no longer be prosecuted due to the statute of limitations. He was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms. During a 3-day pre-sentencing hearing, survivors and the families of victims stood at this podium. They were finally able to address the man who had remained an anonymous shadow for most of their lives. The proceedings ended his period of anonymity and allowed the survivors to document the impact of his crimes in a public, permanent record. While DeAngelo was the first suspect arrested through public genetic genealogy, the success of the case changed the way investigators approach cases that have remained cold for decades. This specific methodology has since been used to identify suspects in over 150 other dormant investigations, providing a new investigative path when traditional DNA databases fail to return a match. DeAngelo relied on the assumption that the simple passage of time would make his crimes unsolvable by degrading evidence and outlasting the memories of investigators. Ultimately, the case demonstrated that time does not protect the guilty. Instead, the passage of years simply allowed forensic science to develop the tools necessary to bridge the gap between a DNA profile and a name.